How a team mechanic and a billionaire built a solar oasis in the Texas desert. The Texas sun blazed like a molten coin in the sky, its heat warping the air above the cracked highway. A lone teenager, grease smeared across his hands and defiance etched into his stance, stared down a billionaire in a $10,000 suit. "Your car's broken," Lucas said, tossing a wrench casually between his fingers. "But maybe you're the real fixer-upper." What happens when a desert mechanic with nothing to lose collides with a tycoon who's forgotten how to live? Buckle up, because this isn't just a story about engines, it's about redemption, rust, and the sparks that fly when two worlds crash headfirst into each other. Don't miss a single twist. Hit subscribe and ring the bell. The sun hung mercilessly over the endless expanse of the Texas desert, its golden rays reflecting off the cracked asphalt like a shimmering mirage. The horizon stretched out in every direction, barren and unyielding, save for the occasional tumbleweed rolling across the dusty plains. Somewhere along this desolate stretch of road, Lucas leaned against the hood of his beat-up old truck, squinting at the horizon through the haze of heat waves. His hands were smudged with grease, his shirt damp with sweat, but his expression remained calm, almost indifferent, as if the oppressive heat didn't bother him at all. At 14 years old, Lucas had already spent half his life learning how to fix things. It wasn't just about cars or machines, it was about solving problems, making broken things work again. He'd inherited that trait from his father, a mechanic who had once been the pride of their small town before tragedy struck. Now, alongside his mother Rosa, he ran Rusty Bolt, the family auto repair shop nestled on the outskirts of Laredo. To most people passing through, it was nothing more than a weather garage surrounded by rusting car parts and oil drums. But to Lucas it was home, a place where he could lose himself in the hum of engines and the satisfying crackle of welding sparks. Today, however, something unusual caught his attention. On one of the security cameras mounted outside the shop, a sleek black luxury vehicle came into view, crawling slowly down the highway. Its windows were tinted, its design futuristic, a stark contrast to the rugged landscape around it. Lucas frowned as he zoomed in on the monitor. Something wasn't right. The car's front end was smoking faintly, and its speed was erratic, as though struggling to keep moving forward. "Trouble?" Lucas muttered under his breath. Grabbing a rag to wipe his hands, he hopped into the driver's seat of his truck and revved the engine. Despite his youthful appearance, there was an air of determination about him. This wasn't just curiosity driving him, it was something deeper. Every challenge, every problem waiting to be solved, felt like a test of his abilities. And Lucas hated failing tests. By the time Lucas arrived, the luxury car had pulled over to the side of the road, its engine silent but still radiating heat. A man stepped out cautiously, his tailored suit looking absurdly out of place in the arid wilderness. Arthur Kane stood tall, his sharp features framed by silver-streaked hair, his piercing blue eyes scanning the surroundings with a mix of irritation and suspicion. If anyone else had found themselves stranded in such a situation, they might have panicked or called for help immediately. But not Arthur. Known in the media as Shark Kane, the billionaire tech mogul had built his empire on ruthless efficiency and an unshakable distrust of others. Even now, stranded in the middle of nowhere, he refused to let vulnerability show. Arthur glanced up as Lucas's truck screeched to a halt nearby, kicking up a cloud of dust. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The boy slid out of the cab, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. His gaze flickered briefly over the disabled vehicle before settling on Arthur, who regarded him with thinly veiled disdain. "What do you want?" Arthur asked curtly, his voice clipped and authoritative. Lucas smirked, unfazed by the older man's tone. "Looks like your fancy toy broke down. Need a hand?" Arthur's jaw tightened. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Lucas shot back, crossing his arms. "It's business. You pay, I fix. Simple." For a moment, Arthur hesitated. There was something unsettling about the kid's confidence, as if he knew exactly what he was doing, and perhaps even more unsettling, as if he didn't care who Arthur was. In a world where everyone either feared or fawned over him, Lucas's indifference was jarring. Still, Arthur wasn't about to trust anyone blindly. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a thick envelope stuffed with cash and held it out. "Here. Take it and leave me alone." Lucas stared at the money, then burst out laughing. "Does that burn?" "Because I need fire for my welder, not paper." Arthur blinked, momentarily taken aback. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not in years anyway. Most people would have jumped at the chance to take his money, no questions asked. But this kid, he was different. Dangerous even. "Fine," Arthur said finally, shoving the envelope back into his pocket. "What do you propose?" Lucas grinned, already pulling tools from the bed of his truck. First, we cool down your overheated ego. Then, maybe we can figure out why your car decided to throw a tantrum. As Lucas worked, Arthur watched him closely, trying to decipher the boy's motives. Was he really just here to make a quick buck? Or was there something else, some ulterior motive hidden beneath his cocky demeanor? Either way, Arthur couldn't deny that the kid seemed to know what he was doing. Within minutes, Lucas had diagnosed the issue, a faulty cooling system exacerbated by the extreme desert temperatures. "You're lucky I showed up when I did," Lucas remarked casually as he tightened a bolt. "Another hour out here, and your precious ride would have turned into a toaster oven." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "And yet you claim you're not doing this out of kindness." "Nope." Lucas straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Like I said, it's business. Besides," he paused, glancing toward the distant outline of Rusty Bolt. "I've got a reputation to uphold. Can't let some rich guy's meltdown ruin my streak." Arthur studied him for a long moment, his mind racing. There was something intriguing about this boy, something raw and untamed that reminded him of a younger version of himself. Maybe that's why, instead of dismissing him outright, Arthur found himself asking, "What's your name?" "Lucas," the boy replied simply. "And you're Shark Kane." "Big deal." To his credit, Arthur didn't flinch at the mention of his infamous nickname. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Lucas, you've earned my respect for now. But don't expect any favors." Lucas chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." The encounter ended as abruptly as it began. With the car repaired and Arthur back on the road, Lucas returned to Rusty Bolt, his thoughts swirling. He hadn't expected much from the day, a few routine repairs, maybe a snack break with his mom, but meeting Arthur Kane had left an impression. Not because of the man's wealth or fame, but because of the strange tension between them. It was as if they were two opposing forces colliding in the vast emptiness of the desert, neither willing to yield. Back at the shop, Rosa looked up from her workbench as Lucas walked in. "Who is that?" she asked, nodding toward the road. "Just another customer," Lucas replied with a shrug, though the mischievous glint in his eye betrayed him. Rosa smiled knowingly. "You mean trouble?" He grinned. "Yeah, but the fun kind." Thus began an unlikely connection, one forged not by shared interests or mutual admiration, but by the abrasive friction of two worlds colliding. Little did either of them know, this chance meeting in the heart of the Texas desert would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Lucas returned to Rusty Bolt, his mind still replaying the events of the previous day. Arthur Kane's car was long gone, but the memory of their encounter lingered like the faint smell of burnt oil in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the man than met the eye, something hidden beneath the polished exterior, something broken that even money couldn't fix. "Lucas!" Rosa called from the other side of the garage, snapping him out of his thoughts. She stood by an old pickup truck, her hands covered in grease as she tightened a bolt with practiced ease. "Stop daydreaming and get over here. We've got work to do." "Yes, Mom," Lucas replied, rolling his eyes but grinning as he grabbed a wrench. Despite her no-nonsense attitude, Rosa had always been the heart of Rusty Bolt. Her laughter could light up the darkest corners of the shop, and her wisdom often guided Lucas through challenges far beyond his years. But today, as they worked side by side, Lucas found himself distracted again. "You're thinking about that guy, aren't you?" Rosa asked suddenly, catching him off guard. She didn't look up from her task, but the knowing tone in her voice made it clear she'd been observing him closely. "What guy?" Lucas tried to play it cool, though he knew better than to lie outright to his mother. She had a way of seeing right through people, a skill she claimed came from years of fixing engines and raising a stubborn teenager. "The one whose car you fixed yesterday." Rosa finally turned to face him, her dark eyes sharp and curious. "Don't think I didn't notice how late you came home. Or how smug you looked when you walked in." Lucas sighed, leaning against the workbench. "He wasn't just some guy, Mom. He was Arthur Kane. You know Shark Kane? The tech billionaire who ruined half the economy last year." Rosa raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. And Lucas hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened without sounding ridiculous. "He was different. Not like the stories you hear on the news. He acted like he didn't need anyone, but I could tell he needed help. Maybe not just with his car." Rosa studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "People are complicated, Mijo. Sometimes they don't even realize they're broken until someone shows them." Meanwhile, miles away in Austin, Arthur sat alone in his sprawling mansion, staring at the sleek dashboard of his repaired luxury vehicle. The car purred softly, its systems running smoothly once again. But Arthur's mind was anything but calm. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy Lucas, and the way he'd refused his money so casually, as if it meant nothing. No one had ever done that before. Not employees, not business partners, certainly not strangers. Arthur clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He hated feeling out of control, hated the idea that someone might see through his carefully constructed facade. And yet, there was something oddly refreshing about Lucas's blunt honesty. It reminded him of a time when life hadn't been so complicated, when success wasn't measured in stock prices or headlines. But curiosity soon outweighed irritation. Over the next few days, Arthur found himself researching Laredo, poring over maps and articles about the small desert town. He learned about Rusty Bolt and its reputation for repairing everything from vintage trucks to modern hybrids. Most intriguingly, he discovered that Rosa, the woman who ran the shop, had once been a highly skilled automotive engineer, before being laid off during one of his company's infamous downsizing campaigns. A plan began to form in Arthur's mind. If Lucas thought he was clever, then perhaps it was time to turn the tables. Disguising himself in a pair of worn jeans and a faded jacket, Arthur drove back to Laredo, this time in an older, less conspicuous vehicle. As he approached Rusty Bolt, he felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. What exactly was he hoping to achieve? Answers? Redemption? Or simply another chance to test the boundaries of his own pride? When Arthur arrived, Lucas was bent over the engine of a beat-up sedan, his brow furrowed in concentration. He glanced up briefly as the unfamiliar car pulled into the lot, then returned to his work without giving it much thought. It wasn't until Arthur stepped out and approached him that recognition dawned. "Well, well," Lucas said, straightening up with a smirk. "Look who decided to trade in his spaceship for a jalopy." Arthur ignored the jab, focusing instead on maintaining his disguise. "My car's acting up," he lied smoothly. "Thought maybe you could take a look." Lucas crossed his arms, clearly amused. "You sure you can afford our rates? We charge extra for fancy suits these days." For a split second, Arthur considered doubling down on the act, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the glint of mischief in Lucas's eyes, or the realization that pretending to be someone else wouldn't get him any closer to understanding the truth. With a resigned sigh, he removed his cap, revealing his silver-streaked hair. "Caught me," Arthur admitted gruffly. "But I'm not here to cause trouble. Just curious." Lucas laughed, shaking his head. "Curiosity killed the shark, huh?" Before Arthur could respond, Rosa appeared, carrying a tray of freshly made burritos. "Who's your friend, Lucas?" she asked warmly, offering one of the spicy wraps to Arthur. "This is," Lucas started, but Arthur cut him off. "Just a customer," Arthur said quickly, accepting the food with a nod of thanks. "Though I suppose I should introduce myself properly. My name's Arthur." Rosa froze mid-step, her expression shifting from friendly to guarded in an instant. For a moment no one spoke. Then slowly she extended her hand. "Rosa, nice to meet you." The tension in the air was palpable, but Arthur didn't flinch. Instead he held her gaze steadily, silently acknowledging the weight of their shared history. Whatever judgment Rosa might have passed, she kept it to herself for now. As the day wore on, Arthur found himself drawn deeper into the rhythm of life at Rusty Bolt. He watched as Lucas expertly diagnosed problems and improvised solutions, marveling at the boy's ingenuity. He listened as Rosa shared stories about her past, her passion for engineering evident in every word. And gradually he began to see the world, not just the machines but the people around him, in a new light. By the time evening fell, Arthur knew he couldn't leave things as they were. There was too much unfinished business, too many questions left unanswered. But for the first time in years he also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to make amends, not with money or power but with action. As he climbed back into his car and drove away, Arthur glanced at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Lucas waving goodbye. The boy's grin was infectious, full of confidence and defiance. For all his wealth and influence, Arthur realized he had much to learn from someone who valued integrity over profit. Little did he know, This was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, redemption, and the true meaning of repair. The sun hung low in the Texas sky, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Rusty Bolt. Inside the garage, the air buzzed with activity, tools clinking, engines humming, and Rose's steady voice guiding Lucas through a particularly tricky repair. But today, there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Arthur's presence lingered like an unspoken question, his earlier visits stirring up memories Rosa had long buried. Lucas noticed it first, the way his mother hesitated when tightening a bolt, her hands trembling slightly before she steadied herself. He set down his wrench and approached her cautiously. "Mom? You okay?" Rosa glanced at him, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Mijo. Just thinking." "About what?" Lucas pressed, sensing there was more to her silence. Rosa sighed, leaning against the workbench. For a moment she stared at the floor, as if gathering the courage to speak. Then softly she began. "When I was younger, I worked for a big tech company. They promised innovation, progress, a chance to change the world. But instead," her voice trailed off, heavy with regret. "They fired you," Lucas finished, piecing together fragments of stories he'd heard over the years but never fully understood. Rosa nodded. "Not just me. Hundreds of us. Engineers, designers, people who gave their lives to those projects. And for what? So someone like Arthur Kane could cut costs and boost profits." Lucas frowned, his fists clenching involuntarily. "That's why you hate him." "I don't hate him," Rosa corrected gently. "Hate doesn't fix anything. But I won't pretend I trust him either. People like him, they break things without ever having to pick up the pieces." Later that evening, after closing up the shop, Lucas found himself pacing outside, staring at the horizon where Arthur's car had disappeared hours ago. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, he admired Arthur's determination to understand them, to step out of his gilded cage and face the real world. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the pain his mother still carried, a wound that no amount of money or apologies could heal. "You're thinking too hard," a voice interrupted. Lucas turned to see Rosa standing behind him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and sat down on the steps leading into the garage. "You've got that look again, the one you get when you're trying to solve the universe." "I'm not solving the universe," Lucas muttered, though he accepted the coffee gratefully. "Just wondering if we should trust him." Rosa sipped her drink thoughtfully. "Trust isn't something you give blindly. It's earned, piece by piece." "But what if he screws us over?" Lucas asked, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "What if this is all some game to him? Like, let's play nice with the little people?" Rosa chuckled dryly. "Then we'll handle it together. Remember, Mijo, we're mechanics. Our job isn't just to fix machines, it's to figure out how they work. Same goes for people." Her words struck a chord within Lucas. Maybe she was right. Maybe understanding Arthur wasn't about trusting him completely, it was about seeing what made him tick, uncovering the layers beneath the polished exterior. Meanwhile, back in Austin, Arthur sat alone in his study, surrounded by blueprints and sketches. The image of Rosa's tired yet defiant expression haunted him, replaying in his mind like a broken record. He had always prided himself on being a visionary, a man who shaped the future. But now, faced with the consequences of his actions, he felt like nothing more than a relic of the past, a machine built for efficiency, oblivious to the human cost of its operations. He picked up a pen and began scribbling furiously, his ideas flowing faster than he could write them down. What if he could create something meaningful? Something that didn't just serve the elite but actually helped communities like Laredo thrive? The concept of a solar-powered charging station for electric vehicles came to him almost instinctively, a fusion of cutting-edge technology and practical sustainability. But it wasn't just about the station itself, it was about redemption. About proving that even someone like him could contribute to something greater than profit margins. A week later, Arthur returned to Rusty Bolt, this time without pretense. He parked his car in the lot and walked straight into the garage, carrying a rolled-up blueprint under his arm. Rosa and Lucas looked up from their work, surprised by his sudden reappearance. "I have a proposal," Arthur announced, spreading the blueprint across the workbench. "A solar-powered charging station designed specifically for desert conditions. I want you to oversee the project, Rosa, as head engineer." For a moment, the room fell silent. Rosa studied the design, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up at Arthur, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Why should I believe you?" Arthur met her stare, his voice steady despite the weight of her question. "Because I owe you. Because I want to make things right, not just for you but for everyone I've wronged." Lucas watched the exchange, torn between skepticism and hope. "And what's in it for you?" he demanded, stepping forward. Arthur hesitated, then answered honestly, "Maybe nothing. Or maybe a second chance." As the days turned into weeks, the trio threw themselves into the project with relentless energy. Rosa took charge of the technical aspects, her expertise shining through every decision. Lucas served as both apprentice and mediator, bridging the gap between Arthur's high-tech vision and Rosa's grounded pragmatism. And Arthur? He proved himself in unexpected ways, not just with his knowledge, but with his willingness to roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty. One afternoon, as they worked side by side welding a support beam, Lucas glanced at Arthur and smirked. "Never thought I'd see the day Kane traded his suit for coveralls." Arthur grunted, sparks flying as he adjusted the welder. "There's a first time for everything, kid." Despite the lingering doubts and occasional arguments, a fragile sense of camaraderie began to form among them. It wasn't perfect, in fact, it was messy, complicated, and often frustrating, but it was real. By the end of the chapter, the groundwork for the Oasis Station was laid, both literally and metaphorically. Yet beneath the surface, unresolved tensions simmered, waiting to boil over. Could Arthur truly change, or was this just another calculated move? Would Rosa ever forgive him, or would her scars run too deep? And Lucas, caught between loyalty to his mother and curiosity about Arthur, what role would he play in shaping their shared future? The sun blazed over Laredo as the first beams of the Oasis Station began to take shape. What had started as a blueprint on Arthur's desk was now transforming into reality, a sprawling structure of solar panels and wind turbines designed to harness the relentless Texas sun and wind. The project wasn't just about building a charging station, it was about bridging two worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. For Rosa, Lucas, and Arthur, it became a daily ritual of collaboration, frustration, and gradual understanding. Each morning, Rosa arrived at the site with a thermos of strong coffee and a clipboard full of notes. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning every detail of the construction. Years of working in corporate engineering had taught her precision, but this project demanded something more: creativity, adaptability, and trust. And trust, she realized, was the hardest part. Arthur, for all his wealth and intelligence, had never worked under someone else's direction before. Yet here he was, taking orders from Rosa as if she were the CEO of his forgotten dreams. At first, their interactions were terse, punctuated by sharp exchanges when disagreements arose. But slowly something shifted. Arthur began to see Rosa not as a victim of his past decisions, but as a partner in shaping the future. "You're overcomplicating this," Rosa said one afternoon, pointing to a section of the blueprint where Arthur had added unnecessary sensors. "We don't need all these bells and whistles. Keep it simple." Arthur frowned, resisting the urge to argue. "Simple doesn't always mean efficient." "No," Rosa countered, her tone firm but not unkind. "But efficient doesn't always mean sustainable. Remember who we're building this for, the people who live here, not the ones who can afford luxury." Lucas, watching from nearby as he tightened bolts on a support beam, couldn't help but grin. "Looks like Mom's schooling you, Shark." Arthur shot him a glare, but there was no real malice behind it. Instead, he chuckled softly. "Maybe I needed someone to put me in my place." For Lucas, the project was both exhilarating and challenging. He thrived on the hands-on work, learning new skills alongside seasoned engineers and local workers. But what surprised him most was how much he enjoyed teaching others. As word spread about the Oasis Station, curious kids from the neighborhood began showing up, eager to learn about mechanics and renewable energy. Arthur suggested turning this informal gathering into a structured program, dubbing Lucas the junior ambassador of the initiative. "Me? A teacher?" Lucas had laughed when Arthur proposed the idea. "I'm barely old enough to drive." "You've got more practical knowledge than half the engineers I've worked with," Arthur replied. "Besides, sometimes the best teachers are the ones who haven't forgotten what it's like to be a student." So Lucas took on the role with characteristic enthusiasm, leading workshops for children after school. He showed them how to solder circuits, assemble solar panels, and even weld small metal pieces. Watching their faces light up with excitement reminded him why he loved fixing things. It wasn't just about solving problems, it was about creating possibilities. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the nearly completed station, Arthur climbed onto the roof to inspect the final panel installation. Below him, Rosa and Lucas were deep in conversation, their laughter carrying on the warm desert breeze. For a moment, Arthur allowed himself to imagine what life might have been like if he'd chosen a different path, if he'd value people over profit, connection over control. "Need a hand?" Lucas called up, noticing Arthur struggling with a stubborn bolt. "I've got it," Arthur replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Moments later, the bolt slipped from his wrench, clattering loudly to the ground. Lucas burst out laughing. "Sure you do, old man." Grumbling but amused, Arthur accepted Lucas's assistance. Together, they secured the last panel, their combined effort symbolizing something greater than the sum of its parts. As they stood side by side, surveying the fruits of their labor, Arthur felt a rare sense of peace. "This is good work," he said quietly. "Real work." Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah. Feels like we're building something that'll last." Back at Rusty Bolt, the transformation extended beyond the physical project. Arthur, who had initially planned to stay only until the station was complete, found himself reluctant to leave. There was something comforting about the garage's chaotic charm. The smell of oil and burnt coffee. The sound of Rosa humming while she worked. When he tentatively asked if he could rent the small apartment above the shop, neither Rosa nor Lucas hesitated to agree. "It's not exactly five-star accommodations," Rosa warned, handing him a set of keys. "But it beats that mansion of yours." Arthur smiled faintly. Sometimes simplicity is its own luxury. As weeks turned into months, the bonds between them grew stronger. They weren't without their arguments. Arthur still had a penchant for micromanaging, and Lucas couldn't resist teasing him about his lack of mechanical finesse. But these moments only strengthened their connection. Even Rosa, who had once viewed Arthur with suspicion, began to see him as more than just the man who had wronged her. He was flawed, yes, but so were they all. And perhaps that was the point. One night, as they sat together drinking coffee, black for Arthur, sweetened for Rosa and Lucas, the conversation turned philosophical. What happens when machines break down? Arthur mused aloud. You fix them. Replace parts, update software. But what about people? How do you repair trust? Rosa leaned back in her chair, considering the question. It's not about replacing anything. It's about rebuilding. Piece by piece, day by day. Lucas smirked, raising his mug. And maybe throwing in a few punches to the ego along the way. They all laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet night. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of engines and the warmth of shared purpose, they realized something profound. The Oasis Station wasn't just a place to charge vehicles. It was a testament to the power of second chances, proof that even the most broken things could find new life if given the right tools and care. The grand opening of the Oasis Station arrived on a crisp Texas morning, the kind where the desert air feels alive with possibility. The station stood as a testament to resilience. A sprawling complex of solar panels and wind turbines, its sleek design blending seamlessly with the rugged landscape. At its heart was a charging hub capable of powering dozens of electric vehicles simultaneously, all powered by renewable energy harvested from the unforgiving sun and wind. For Rosa, Lucas, and Arthur, this day marked more than just the culmination of months of hard work. It was a celebration of trust rebuilt, barriers broken, and lives transformed. Yet beneath the surface of triumph lay an undercurrent of quiet reflection. Each of them had changed in ways they hadn't anticipated, their journeys converging like tributaries feeding into a mighty river. As townsfolk gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Lucas stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with a mix of pride and disbelief. Kids he'd taught in his workshops buzzed around excitedly, pointing at the solar panels and whispering about how Lucas showed us how to build that. He couldn't help but grin, though part of him still felt like the same grease-streaked kid who'd once doubted whether anyone would take him seriously. You did good, Mijo, Rosa said, appearing beside him with a warm smile. She handed him a cup of coffee, strong and sweet, just the way he liked it. Look at them. You've given these kids something to believe in. Lucas shrugged modestly. They're the ones doing the believing. I just gave them tools. And sometimes, Rosa added softly, that's enough. Her words lingered in his mind as Arthur approached, dressed in his usual worn jeans and jacket, a far cry from the polished billionaire he'd been when they first met. Over time, Arthur had shed not only his tailored suits but also much of the armor he'd built around himself. His hair was grayer now, his hands calloused from months of manual labor, but there was a lightness to him that hadn't existed before. "Ready for your big moment?" Arthur asked, nodding toward the podium where local officials waited to begin the ceremony. Lucas smirked. "Big moment? Thought you were the one giving the speech, Shark." Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. "Not anymore. This is your show, kid. Your name's on the plaque." Sure enough, near the entrance of the station stood a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "Dedicated to Lucas Martinez, whose vision and determination brought this dream to life." Beneath it was a smaller inscription, "And to Rosa Martinez, whose wisdom guided us all." Lucas stared at the plaque, momentarily speechless. For someone who'd spent most of his life fixing things without expecting recognition, seeing his name immortalized felt surreal. But what struck him most was the acknowledgement of his mother's role. Not as a victim of circumstance, but as a leader and mentor. The ceremony itself was a blur of applause, speeches, and laughter. Local leaders praised the project's innovation and environmental impact, while community members shared stories of how the station would improve their daily lives. When it came time for Lucas to speak, he stepped up to the microphone with a nervous grin. "I'm not great at speeches," he admitted, earning a few chuckles from the crowd. "But I do know one thing. This place isn't just about charging cars. It's about charging hope. About proving that even in the middle of nowhere, we can create something amazing if we work together." He paused, glancing back at Arthur and Rosa, who stood side by side watching him. "A lot of people helped make this happen. My mom, who taught me everything I know. Arthur, who proved that even sharks can learn to swim upstream. And everyone here, who reminded me that no matter how tough things get, we're stronger when we stick together." The crowd erupted into cheers and Lucas stepped down, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. As the festivities continued, Arthur pulled him aside. "You handled that well," Arthur said, his tone uncharacteristically soft. "Better than I ever could have." Lucas shrugged. "Guess I learned from the best. Or worse, depending on how you look at it." Arthur laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Smartass." Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them sat together atop the station's roof, gazing out at the vast expanse of desert. The stars above glittered like scattered diamonds, their brilliance undimmed by city lights. "You know," Arthur began, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think success was about numbers, stock prices, headlines, zeros in a bank account. But sitting here, looking at what we've built, I realize it's about something else entirely." "What's that?" Lucas asked, leaning back on his elbows. "Legacy," Arthur replied simply. "Not the kind you leave behind in wills or monuments, but the kind that lives on in people. In the connections we forge, the lessons we share, the second chances we give each other." Rosa nodded thoughtfully. "And sometimes it's about admitting you don't have all the answers. That's harder than any equation." Lucas grinned. "Or punching someone in the ego until they listen." They all laughed, the sound carrying across the empty desert. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the warmth of shared purpose, they understood something profound. The Oasis Station wasn't just a physical structure. It was a bridge between past and future, a symbol of healing and renewal. As weeks turned into months, the station became a cornerstone of the community. Travelers passing through Laredo stopped to recharge not only their vehicles but also their spirits. Children continued to flock to Lucas's workshops, eager to learn and dream bigger. Rosa took on apprentices, passing down her knowledge to a new generation of mechanics and engineers. And Arthur? He found peace in the simplicity of his new life, content to tinker with engines and sip coffee alongside those who had once been strangers. Yet even as their individual roles evolved, the bond they shared remained steadfast. They weren't perfect, arguments still flared, tempers occasionally boiled over, but their disagreements only strengthened their connection. After all, relationships, like machines, required regular maintenance to keep running smoothly. One night, as they sat together under the stars, Arthur turned to Lucas with a mischievous glint in his eye. "You know, kid, I never did teach you how to properly weld aluminum." Lucas snorted. "Yeah, because your idea of teaching involves nearly setting yourself on fire." "Well," Arthur countered with a grin, "maybe it's time you returned the favor. Show me how the pros do it." And so, under the watchful eyes of Rosa, They worked late into the night, sparks flying as they laughed and argued and created something beautiful together. Because in the end, that's what life was about, not perfection but progress. Not fear but forgiveness. Not isolation but connection. The years passed like grains of sand slipping through an hourglass, each moment fleeting yet significant. The Oasis Station had become more than just a charging hub. It was a beacon of hope in the vast Texas desert, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together despite their differences. But as the seasons changed, so too did the lives of those who had built it. Arthur, now well into his 70s, began spending more time sitting on the porch of the small apartment above Rusty Bolt. His once sharp features were softened by age, and the fiery intensity that had once defined him had mellowed into something gentler, wiser. He no longer wore suits or carried himself with the air of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. Instead, he favored worn flannel shirts and jeans, his hands often stained with grease from tinkering with old car parts. Lucas noticed the change first. One afternoon, as he worked on repairing a vintage motorcycle, Arthur shuffled over, leaning heavily on a cane. "Need a hand?" he asked, though his voice lacked its usual vigor. Lucas smirked, setting down his wrench. "You? With that thing? Might as well let me teach you quantum physics." Arthur chuckled weakly but didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he sank into a nearby chair, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then softly Arthur said, "I've been thinking about legacies." Lucas froze, sensing the weight behind the words. "What about them?" "Not the flashy ones," Arthur continued, his tone reflective. "Not the buildings or the patents or the headlines. Those fade. What lasts are the ripples, the little things we leave behind without even realizing it." That evening Rosa joined them for dinner. A simple meal of grilled steak, roasted vegetables, and fresh tortillas. The three of them sat around the table, the conversation flowing easily as it always did. Yet there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared awareness that time was moving forward, whether they liked it or not. "You know," Rosa began, breaking the comfortable silence, "when I was younger, I used to think success meant climbing higher, getting promotions, earning titles. But now," she paused, smiling faintly, "now I think it's about planting seeds, watching them grow, even if you don't get to see the full tree." Arthur nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And sometimes those seeds surprise you. They take root in places you never expected." Lucas listened intently, his mind racing with questions he didn't know how to ask. He'd always known Arthur wasn't invincible. No one was, but seeing him confront his own mortality made something inside Lucas shift. It wasn't fear exactly, but a deepening sense of responsibility. If Arthur's legacy was the Oasis Station, then what would his be? What kind of ripples would he leave behind? Weeks turned into months, and Arthur's health continued to decline. He stopped working on projects altogether, content instead to watch from the sidelines as Rosa and Lucas kept the station running smoothly. On some days, he would sit quietly in the garage, listening to the hum of engines and the laughter of children learning to weld. Other days, he would retreat to his apartment, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal that no one else was allowed to read. One crisp autumn morning, Lucas found Arthur sitting alone on the roof of the station, gazing out at the endless expanse of desert. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Arthur looked peaceful, almost serene, as if he belonged to the landscape itself. "You shouldn't be up here," Lucas scolded gently, helping him steady himself. "Mom'll kill me if she finds out." Arthur waved him off with a dismissive grunt. "Your mom worries too much. Besides, this might be my last chance to see the sunrise from up here." Lucas swallowed hard, forcing a grin. "Last chance, huh? Guess I'd better make it count." They sat together in companionable silence, watching as the light spread across the horizon. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me something, kid. Anything. When I'm gone, don't let anyone turn this place into a museum. Keep it alive. Keep it messy. That's how you honor a legacy. Not by preserving it, but by letting it grow." Lucas nodded, blinking back tears. "You got it, old man. No museums. Just grease and grit." Arthur smiled faintly, patting him on the shoulder. "Good. Now help me down before your mother has both our heads." Arthur passed away quietly one winter night, surrounded by the people who had become his family. There were no grand ceremonies or public memorials, just a small gathering at Rusty Bolt, where friends and neighbors shared stories of the man who had once been known as Shark Kane but had died as something far greater. A mentor, a friend, and a builder of bridges. In accordance with his wishes, the bulk of Arthur's estate was donated to establish a free trade school in Laredo, offering courses in mechanics, engineering, and renewable energy. The academy bore a plaque with a single line engraved beneath Arthur's name. "Here lies a shark who learned to swim upstream." Lucas insisted on adding a postscript of his own. Nailed it. Years later, as Lucas stood atop the Oasis Station, now expanded to include classrooms and research labs, he couldn't help but smile. The wind turbines spun lazily in the breeze, their blades catching the sunlight like shards of glass. Below him, a group of students laughed and argued over a half-finished engine, their voices echoing across the desert. Rosa appeared beside him, her hair streaked with silver but her eyes as sharp as ever. "Proud of yourself?" she teased, nudging him playfully. Lucas shrugged, grinning. "Just carrying on the tradition. Fixing things." Rosa chuckled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Not bad for a couple of mechanics, huh?" As they stood there side by side, Lucas felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they'd built, the people they'd touched, and the legacy they'd inherited. Arthur may have been gone, but his spirit lived on in every bolt tightened, every spark ignited, and every dream nurtured within the walls of the Oasis Station. Because in the end, the true measure of a life wasn't in the monuments left behind, but in the hearts that carried its memory forward. And in that regard, Arthur Kane had succeeded beyond measure. As the Oasis Station hummed to life under the desert stars, Lucas pocketed Arthur's final gift. A key stamped with a single word: legacy. But when a shadowy figure arrives in Laredo, asking questions about Arthur's past, will their hard-won peace go up in flames? Stay tuned, because even the sturdiest engines have secrets waiting to explode.